I were to take this thing, stack it on top of this thing, and then put my head sideways, just tilt my head like just even 2 degrees, I will still hear stereo sound. Because the only thing that matters is that there's two sources of sound happening in the room at once. Because ultimately, if you think about it, like the best way to understand the way stereo sound works is if you were to take the way that stereo sound is recorded and you reverse the process. These things actually work more like resonators than they do like sound sources. And that's why they have these funny characteristics, like you could actually play them at each other and do phase cancellation. Whereas like in real life, like if I were to strike a bell is obviously resonating, right? And I were to strike another bell, and let's say I striked it in just the improper time, one bell is not going to cancel out the sound of another bell. If two people are singing a duet and one person's off like by a little bit, by half a sine wave, they're not going to like cancel out each other and just end up saying like utter silence. So whereas these, since they work more like sound reflective sources, what's really happening is that the X cross array of mics, the mic that is recording them, is essentially blasting the sound out backward. And that's the illusion that is happening. So these things are resonating as if I was recording with a cross mic array, and the reversal of that is that the cross mic array, as opposed to listening to everything in the room, is actually blasting out everything into these speakers. But it's also blasting out everything else at the same time, all the out of phase signals and everything. And all the sounds are actually filling up the room. So the sum of everything you hear is not just the direct radiation of the cross mic array blasting out directly into the resonators, but all the out of phase sounds that are occurring as a sum throughout the entire room. And then from there, both your ears separate the two layers of sound. And then from there, it uses timing and phase to try to make sense of a three-dimensional environment, which is what makes stereo sound 3D. Like the more transparent your sound is, the more it sounds actually literally 3D. And I know a lot of people probably noticed that like you don't actually need necessarily a. It's cool to have Atmos, but you don't really absolutely need anything more than two speakers to actually hear 3D. You don't, like, especially even if you play like the I mean, everyone knows about binaural, but I mean the old 3DS or even the old 2DS. If you hold it, just right in front of you, you can actually hear straight up 3D sound. They actually tuned the speakers in such a way that they went beyond 3D. They actually added all the phase corrections and the Doppler effects and everything to make it so that you could actually hear doors close behind you. It's perfectly possible to create the sound of a full 3D environment, to model everything about a full 3D environment in a completely synthetic setting. And what's cool is when you do a live recording or anything, even if they use a virtual space, it's possible to actually include all the sounds, all the spatial signatures that will then be used once you actually do play a song back. Once it fills your room with all that sound, it's as if the recording source was actually in the room with you. So let's say I had my cross mic array there, right? And in front of me was the band. I would be listening to them at an angle, about like that, right? And then that would be basically two angles of sound that would be as close as possible to the way our ears hear, right? And then everything that goes directly into the mic is seen as basically being like the first thing that hits the mic. So it's the first thing your ears register. Everything that hits it from every other angle, basically either bouncing off the wall right next to the speakers, or sorry, bouncing off the wall right next to the performers, bouncing off the ceiling, bouncing off just everything else from even behind you, is still entering the mic, but it's entering the mic at a delay. And the delay is still entering the mic differently per each microphone, while the microphone is still sitting steady. And that's what creates three-dimensional sound. So in restoring three-dimensional sound and understanding that speakers work more like resonators than they do work like actual sound sources, the purpose of your speakers is to behave as if they just so happen to be there, and they happen to be so dang resonant that they're able to resonate your entire room in such a way to restore the original sound that happened in that room upon recording. And in doing that, it's gonna play not just whatever first hit the cross mic array directly, it's gonna also record everything else that happened in the room. And that's how we have things like the Hafler effect and stuff like that. That's how we have out of phase sound and stuff. It's all based off of timing and the way that everything reaches those two speakers. Sorry, everything reaches those two microphones coming from a live source. And so now the reason why we typically use two speakers is because two speakers typically play the full range as possible. So they do play all the way up to the more directional signatures, where the wavelengths are so short that we could actually triangulate and know where the sound is coming from. And when you're playing below towards the threshold of where things lose locality and start entering to omnidirectionality, you could do a lot of really interesting stuff. Like to take one of these speakers and to modify it to play only 120 hertz on and down. This thing is actually the same thing as one of these things. I just actually I added a sticker because I wanted to know that it was modded without having to open it and keep constantly checking it. And to have it constantly play from 120 hertz on down, it basically works as like a mid-bass augmentation device, which is pretty cool. Wonder if it'd be kind of cool to add like a gain volume thing, a little gain control to it. I'll probably do that outside, but nonetheless, I chose that because it happens to be like a very, very versatile speaker and it's like solid as hell. So it's useful, and especially because it has the same voicing as the LS50s, so that would work. So I'm gonna try doing it with another set of speakers that are not actually KEF and see if that still works, because one of the questions I don't know for sure is whether or not this would actually work for things that, well, actually no, it doesn't seem like it really necessarily needs to be like a single point driver, because this thing is only using the woofer. I will try it with larger KEF speakers though, and see if that still adds anything at all, because larger KEF speakers already have plenty enough to play. I mean, I have a pair of KEF speakers with like much larger woofers than that, and I have two of them on each. So I don't know if that's going to add much, but it could still deal with a lot of issues as far as like the evenness of the bass in the room, because you have more, just like the way that you have two subwoofers summing and create a more even balanced bass, and it also kind of lends more to tonality and punch because you have the ability to move the air just a lot more rapidly right when it's on call. And this thing is one speaker and it's only playing above the subwoofer range if you're crossing the subwoofer down at 80, so it doesn't even interfere with the subwoofer. It's one speaker and it's capable of playing what these are capable of playing, but just basically reinforcing what these speakers are capable of playing below their actual like anechoic rating and only in their in-room rating, which means that the sum of these speakers are capable of playing down to about 40 only in room, once it's actually able to fill the room with enough sound with the back port. It's able to get down to 40, but that's still, a lot of people have noticed that it still causes like a gap in, if they're trying to like calibrate the speakers to be flat. And this here just adds another layer of being able to adjust things and allows you to correct for nulls and imbalances and have a much flatter response in the crucial region between 120 hertz all the way up. And especially in this case, it's 120 hertz all the way up to about 350 hertz. Because then from 350 hertz, the speakers themselves should automatically be very, very good. And then from there, it's just room acoustics again. Like, I don't know if like adding another speaker at all would help at all. All I know is that with these speakers, since they rely on the port boost, it's only doing that as kind of like a hack, so that it can play lower, but it's not really able to do it with the highest amount of transparency. Whereas this speaker being plugged and only playing the very narrow range, because it could play lower, but I mean, it's only playing the very narrow range of 120 hertz down to 54. And in doing so, it's augmenting these speakers almost like there's like a second woofer on each of them. So yeah, tell me what you think. Thanks for listening.